welcome to this edition of Decoding Diplomacy. I have with me Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, a veteran diplomat, a former ambassador of India to Russia, a former foreign secretary, and the man who can be safely relied upon for insights on India-Russia relations. Uh, Ambassador Sibal, Prime Minister Modi was in Italy for the G7 summit only a few days ago, where he met and interacted with the leaders of the wealthiest Western countries. Now, a few weeks later, he's planning to go to Russia. Uh, how do you look at the forthcoming visit of Prime Minister Modi to Russia? What are we trying to achieve in this visit?
Well, firstly, we had an inkling that this visit would take place this year because when External Affairs Minister visited Moscow in late December 2023 and exceptionally met President Putin, the Russian side made it known that Prime Minister Modi was expected to visit Russia, or in fact, he invited Prime Minister Modi to visit Russia this year. And Jaishankar, in a press interview, I believe, confirmed that this would be in the offing. So in other words, already it was basically decided that during the course of the year, Prime Minister would visit Moscow, and that the annual strategic dialogue, summit-level dialogue between the two countries would get resumed. As you know, the last time President Putin visited India for this dialogue was in December 2021. And since then, because of COVID and the Ukraine war, this dialogue has not taken place. Russia is the only country with which India had uninterrupted summit-level dialogues right from the time that President Putin took power in 2000. So for 21 years, we had annual dialogues. Now, the fact that for the last couple of years, this dialogue hadn't taken place gave rise to some misgivings about India-Russia ties, whether there was a slowdown in these ties, whether because of Russia's involvement in the Ukraine war, collapse of its ties with the West, especially the United States, as well as close relations with China, which have become increasingly stronger, that there was some kind of a distance that was appearing in India-Russia relations. Now, this is the period during which India has become very close to the United States in various areas. And also the importance of Europe in our matrix of foreign policy has also increased. And therefore, there was a contrast that that Prime Minister Modi goes to Washington and meets President Biden, gets invited on a state visit, and there's huge amount of visibility. Then Prime Minister goes to France for the July 14 event, and then gets a huge publicity on that account. Whereas with Russia, there was no such visibility. On top of that, our media, our think tanks have given a lot of prominence to Western views and thinking on the Ukraine conflict. There has been very little understanding of the Russian point of view or a projection of the Russian point of view. This also added to the impression that there might be some form of caution on the Indian side with regard to the visibility we want to give to our ties with Russia. So in that context, I think this visit becomes significant for the following reasons also. One is that soon after this recent election and Prime Minister Modi taking over, immediately goes to the G7 meeting, which was normal because India has been attending the G7 meetings for a long time. The first time was when I was ambassador in France in 2003. So in 2002. So this is nothing new. But the fact that he went so soon after his election was important because I think, A, it was an occasion to meet the top leadership of the Western world, as you said, and also convey to them that there's going to be continuity in India's foreign policy, that he had the mandate of the people, that he was not speaking from a position of defensiveness. That he wanted to mark the fact that he was self-assured, he was self-confident, and that the larger framework of India's foreign policy would remain intact. Now, what is that larger framework? That larger framework is that notwithstanding pressures from the West, and we've seen them in the last couple of years after the Ukraine conflict, we were not going to abandon our traditional ties with Russia. On the contrary, we look at every possible opportunity to maintain those ties because we see those ties being based on India's national interest and also having a trajectory of their own, which is not in conflict with our ties with the West. And therefore, after the G7 meeting, it was, I think, appropriate, diplomatically appropriate, for him to plan a visit to Russia. Now, normally these summits are held towards the end of the year. And towards the end of the year in October, we have the BRICS summit, which would be an occasion for our Prime Minister to travel there. And he could combine that with a bilateral summit with President Putin. But that would have meant a delay of several months. And therefore, I think the opportunity was taken for diplomatic reasons to plan this visit immediately after his election, immediately after the G7 meeting. And in addition to this, another factor to my mind is that he's not going for the SCO summit, which is on July 3, because I believe the parliament would be in session, though some people say that this might be just an excuse. I don't think it's true. So soon after election, when he's got so much on his plate, for him to keep traveling out, I think it is a bit of an issue. He has to do political management at home. And SCO, while it's important for our relations with Central Asia. It is important that we don't leave the space to China in this organization, because along with Russia, they are the prime pillars of this organization. So despite these stakes that we have in SCO, I think it was not easy for him because of the timetable to go to the SCO meeting. And therefore, visiting Russia would make up, to my mind, quite a lot in terms of Prime Minister's absence at the SCO meeting, though, of course, the SCO has a much larger membership and this is a bilateral visit. But nevertheless, the issues that would have come up in the SCO would be discussed during his meeting with President Putin, as well as the Ukraine war, as well as bilateral relations, etc., etc. So it's an important visit, very important visit, and sends multiple signals. The most important to my mind being a signal to the West that whatever your differences with Russia, they are not the determining factors insofar as our relationship with Russia is concerned, which is on a very different wicket. It is actually very important for our national interest to maintain close ties with Russia. And no matter what you think, no matter what pressure you put, no matter what misgivings you have, you do what it is in your national interest, and we will do what is in our national interest, especially as we think what we are doing is in no way harmful to your interest. If you're not able to manage your relations with Russia, it's not our problem. And that's no reason for us to reduce our ties with Russia.
So this visit is an assertion of India's strategic autonomy, right? That we will do what is in our national interest. And in that process, we'll keep juggling multiple relationships if it suits our national interest. Coming to the specific agenda, possible agenda, we don't know what issues will be really discussed. But based on your experience, there is a lot of talk about that India and Russia are planning to open a new chapter in the military partnership. that is defense relationship. There is talk of a defense logistics pact. There is also talk of joint deployment of military assets, warships, and all that. Now, what is so striking about this speculation, we'll see how it materializes and love to have your take on that, is that despite unprecedented pressure by the West on India to downgrade ties with Russia, on the contrary, we are scaling up, especially in the military sphere. How do you look at this?
Well, first of all, this pressure that you're referring to was a fact, no doubt. But I think over the last couple of years, the West has realized that this pressure has not worked and will not work. And therefore, I am not too sure whether there is the same degree of pressure here today. I think they've absorbed the fact that there are limits to what they can do in terms of influencing India's ties with Russia. And this was best demonstrated by the fact that on the oil side, which the West has been saying is what enables Russia to carry on its conflict, carry on its military intervention in Ukraine, because that's where the money is coming from to sustain their military operation. Russia has become our largest oil supplier, overtaking even Saudi Arabia. So on a very critical, sensitive issue of this kind, India has not relented and pursued what it feels it is in its vital national interest. So to come back, I don't think that that pressure is now that overt, though of course behind the scenes they may still be feeling that they've not been able to control India's diplomacy the way that they would have wanted to. They have to be on the defensive because they're still buying a huge amount of LNG from Russia. I mean, they can't have double standards. I mean, they can't be that hypocritical. And they would know that we know. It's all in the public domain. Not only that, they get titanium, they get uranium, God knows what. Anyway, so that is one. The other is in terms of military ties. We have, as we have with the United States and the UK and France and others, regular military exercises, though of course the ones with the West are much more elaborate and much more complex, but we have regular annual naval exercises with Russia. And this has continued. So it's also a fact that the West knows, and we know, that our military is still dependent a great deal on Russian equipment, and that needs to be serviced. We need spare parts. We need maintenance. So it's not as if we can simply walk away from these ties. And at a time when we are facing the Chinese on the border, it has become even more important that we are able to maintain our military machine in good order. And therefore, this subject will naturally be an important one in terms of our discussions, Prime Minister's discussions in Russia. There is the issue of S-400. I think we had ordered 5 of these units. 3 have come, 2 have got delayed. And I think there will be a conversation on that. There would be obviously a detailed conversation on how we can sustain our military-to-military ties. I think India would have also noted that whatever one might say about the Russian military machine, lately, because of the huge amounts of money they've put in, 6% of their GDP is now going into the military sphere. They have developed new technologies, and some of those technologies might be useful to us. And therefore, and Russia has been much more open in terms of transfer of technology to India than any other country. And therefore, I think if we are sensible, which we are, we would look at this carefully to see how we can take advantage of some of these technologies that Russia may have developed in real war conditions. And we would know what the performance of these technologies have been, and therefore whether we can tie up in terms of sharing these technologies. Other than that, I think because of Atmanirbharta, which will go on, Russia would be well advised, and I think they have absorbed the message that if they want to maintain a high level of defense ties with India, there's no choice but to uh, build in India, manufacture in India in collaboration with India. And I believe they are open. It is for us to take some of these decisions, whether we want to go westward, whether we want to go with Russia. But I think this is a line that we must pursue.
Right.
Then, of course, there is this very, very important fact of sustaining our oil imports from Russia. Now, it's a different matter because Russia was cornered. It had to sell below the price that had been artificially fixed by the West. Now, and the volumes have gone up. But how to sustain this? I think this will be very, very carefully considered because this is to our advantage. And linked to that is the whole issue of payments. How these payments will be made, all the accumulation of Indian rupees in our banks, which belong to Russia. We have agreed that they can invest in India, but they also need money. They can't have billions of dollars stashed up in India when they are actually in a war scenario. So how this issue can be addressed going ahead in terms of ruble-rupee trade, how to handle that, what are the channels, etc., whether yuan can be used and to what extent yuan can be used. I mean, some of these issues would come up. And then finally, this whole business about investment by India in Russia's Far East. This has been on the agenda when Prime Minister had gone to Vladivostok. We had committed ourselves to investment in that area. The Vladivostok-Chennai corridor was announced. Linked to this is the Arctic Passage, which is going to change the shape of things in terms of trade corridors. So these are the issues which will obviously be on the agenda, no doubt. And finally, Russia would explain to us, or Putin will explain to Prime Minister, what his vision is with regard to the end game in Ukraine.
Right. So this is very important, Putin's vision of the end game. The last time Prime Minister Modi and Putin met was in the margins of the SCO summit in Samarkand. And, he famously said that this is not the time for war, building on that message. And, subsequently, over the last few months, there have been, some off and on, the Western countries have also reached out to us to use our good relations with Russia to play the role of a mediator of sorts. How do you look at that? What role can India, what would be Putin's vision, which you're talking about? What can we expect, from Putin, and what will Modi convey to Putin?
First of all, this business of asking or expecting India to mediate is a bit of a joke. They don't need this mediation. If they want to talk to Russia, they can talk to Russia. They have talked to Russia before. They can continue talking to Russia. But It is they who don't want to talk to Russia. They don't want to be seen to be talking to Russia. They don't want actually to make any gesture towards Russia, which may be construed by their public and their political class as going soft on Russia and abandoning Ukraine. And repeatedly what they're doing, they're announcing more and more military aid, more and more commitment from tanks to long-range missiles, to F-16s, now the permission to Ukraine to use those Western supplied arms to hit at targets inside Russia. So they are escalating constantly. Mm-hmm. Now, if they were interested in mediation by a third party, then there should have been some signal on the ground that they were also on their side contributing to lowering tensions, de-escalating, and creating a favorable ground diplomatically for third parties who are interested in ending this conflict to intervene. And India could then convey something positive from the Western side. After all, we've had interactions with Western leaders. Jake Sullivan was in Delhi a few days ago. He met the Prime Minister. And he had discussions with the National Security Advisor. So if he had any any vision with regard to how the West wants to move forward with Ukraine, we could convey that vision to the West. But if the vision is that we still want Russia's strategic defeat, and we are talking about even the potential of a nuclear war, then what does Prime Minister say to Putin? So there is no helpful step by the Western side which would enable concerned countries like India, Brazil, or others to jump into the fray and say, "Look, enough is enough. Let's see how we can find some diplomatic solution." Now you have this peace conference in Switzerland, which is a bit of a joke. I mean, you don't invite the party, one of the two principal parties, to the conference, so-called peace conference. And if you look at the statement they've issued, there's no give in that statement at all. The usual thing, for as long as it takes, we'll continue to support Ukraine and stuff like that. And Zelensky's peace plan it just will not go forward. There's no way it can. Russia has already rejected it. So I mean, if you do these kind of diplomatic games, which are intended to isolate Russia, to put more pressure on Russia, to convey that the international community is concerned about what Russia is doing in Ukraine and therefore is unhappy, etc., etc. Now, if this is the background of what is happening on the in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Western attitude towards it, there is nothing much that India can convey to attract a general concern, which Prime Minister can certainly convey of how this is affecting not only geopolitics as a whole, but the interests of the global South. And since we have taken upon ourselves to be the spokesman of the global concerns of the global South, this conflict actually, especially the prospects of an escalation, should be of serious concern to India and other countries of the global South. And this is something which Prime Minister can rationally convey to Putin.
Right. Ambassador Sibal, you rightly said, highlighted this implacable hostility that is building up, that is already built up between the West and Russia, and that there are no helpful steps by the West, which is widening the rift and precluding all possibilities of compromise. For India, going ahead, we have a robust and expanding relationship with the United States. Also, we are scaling our military defense purchases from the United States. The U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, recently expressed some concerns about India's military and technological cooperation with Russia. My question to you is, how would, going ahead, as India scales up or raises the bar for defense partnership through ISET and other co-production templates with the United States, how will it impact India's ongoing or India's plans for further expanding military cooperation with Russia?
With Russia?
Yeah. I mean, how would you juggle? How will India juggle?
Look, when India and United States signed the nuclear deal and got rid of all the vital strategic impediments to our ties, and then went ahead and built this huge economic ties, which is now risen to about $200 billion, and also India buying $22 billion of arms equipment from United States, and doing all the other things like IT, U2, and the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, the Indo-Pacific Accord, and everything else. It had nothing to do with Russia. It was independent of our ties with Russia. It's a different matter that Russia intervened in Ukraine and that this became a factor. But if thinking and the impulsion behind United States and India developing those ties had nothing to do with Russia, but had larger geopolitical aims in view, especially in relation to China from the United States side. From our side, it was not only China, but it was not only... I'd like to speak about that. But just let me finish what I was saying. Therefore, why bring in Russia now? Why bring in Russia and make it some kind of a litmus test of how our uh, how this relationship between India and United States uh, should develop into a fully trustworthy and confident relationship. Now, I would also say that if on the United States side, the principal objective was China, then I think we are falling into a trap. Because, which means that there is no real uh, bilateral substance to the relationship. That is a relationship which is axed on US's interests in a third country and our problems with that third country. That cannot be the basis of the relationship. Tomorrow, if United States and China patch up for some reason, and I have a modus vivendi, then what happens to our ties? Then the entire structure falls to the ground. There has to be something deeper than that.
Right.
And the deeper than that is that India is a rising economy. We now a population which is slightly larger than China's. We are a rising economy. We're the fifth largest. We're going to become the third largest. We have huge human capital in the vital areas of technology, where United States has slipped and China has advanced. We have human potential, human capital to help the United States, and we'll be helping ourselves in the process to build up capacities in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, robotics, semiconductors, and everything else. So there's a huge match between the two countries, plus the fact that there is a huge Indian diaspora in the United States. The tech companies in the United States, most of them are headed by Indian CEOs and this and that. Look at all that is there on the ground in terms of fostering a very good forward-looking relationship between India and the United States, of which, yes, China can be a factor, no doubt, but can't be the principal factor. And of course, I saw that the Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, also expressed some concerns and said they were being addressed in terms of India-US technological ties and the potential of some kind of leakage of these technologies to Russia and all that. I mean, we are past masters in this game for the last decades.
Mm-hmm.
We've had relations with the West and with Russia in the defense domain. We've been able to separate these two streams altogether, and there's never been any complaint so far that I know where the West said, "Oh, the technology we supplied to you has got transferred to Russia." So this may be a concern of some sort, but I think it's an exaggerated concern. And finally, you're not asking the question, or unless you intend to ask me, it's about the orchestrated campaign in the West against Modi and India on minorities, on backsliding of democracy and stuff like that.
Right.
Kanun case and all that. This is a problem in our ties. But if you have a question on that, ask me and I'll respond.
Yes. So the point is this: that, as you rightly said, that India has become a virtuoso at juggling multiple partnerships, which may be contrapuntal. Like India with the United States, and then with the Russia and all that. But also, right now the quality of our relationship with the United States, and the United States will be heading to elections very soon. But off and on, and all this you're talking about, the critique of India's democracy, of treatment of minorities and all in the United States. Where is it all coming from? I mean, is it a network of vested interests who's driving that, and will it affect India's relationship with the United States?
A couple of things. One, you said that we are a virtuoso in managing relationships of different kinds. I think the United States is the biggest virtuoso in this regard.
Right.
I mean, look at that.
Right.
They built up China into this monster that it is today. And today, their largest trade partner is China. And yet they have declared China as their principal adversary. They also now want to have military-to-military level dialogue with China, because they confront China, but they don't want a conflict with China. and therefore they want to have some basic understanding, these guardrails,
Right.
that do not develop into some kind of a military action on the ground. They have
Right.
managed India and Pakistan. Even now, they are reaching out to Pakistan. In the Middle East, Israel. Now, of course, they've had some problems with with other countries, but they have been managing for decades the relationship with Israel as well as with the Gulf countries. They have managed the relationship with Israel as well as Egypt for decades. Uh, so it's not as if I mean, they keep all their options open, and they want to be able to influence developments all over the globe by being in touch with. Look at Trump. He reached out to North Korea. He had a summit meeting with North Korea with a North Korean fellow in Singapore.
Right.
Uh, so,
Right.
so and so they are now strengthening their defense ties with the Philippines, but are unable to intervene in what is happening between Philippines and China. On Taiwan, they are again keeping their options open with China as well as with Taiwan. So anyway, this business about India being playing all sides, actually, it's the United States that historically has been playing all sides in order to assert
Right.
global importance. There no problem in the world can be addressed or solved by the party unless the United States has got a foot into it. But
Right.
leave that aside. That's not your question. I mean, that was your question, but that was your observation to which I responded. Now, insofar as I was frankly quite unhappy that in the latest uh, in the report, 2023 report on international religious freedom, which was uh, which was on which Blinken made some comments. Very unfortunate, very unfortunate that he again
Right.
singled out. This is the second time he's done it. There's no need. They're saying that this concerns 190 countries. But of the 190 countries, who does he pick up? He picks up Pakistan, he picks up India, and he picks up China. And I don't know what else has he picked. But why does he have to pick up? I mean, we are the biggest democracy in the world. We are a democracy that has not faltered virtually, apart from the brief period of emergency in the last 77 years. We've just had the biggest democratic election in history, which has demonstrated that democracy works. Even when Modi and the BJP expected that they would have 400 seats or 300 seats or 350 seats, ultimately the BJP got only 240. This is democracy in action. People have voted. They have shown they have made their choice.
Right.
Institutional capture, this, that, and that, and that. Well, what happened to that? It's not produced the majority that the BJP is looking, which means that the Indian democracy functions. Honor it, respect it. And there you go around saying that. And what is worse is that indirectly, they're fueling social strife in India. What the business does, you have to say that the religious places of minorities are being destroyed. I mean, have they studied what the reason for this is? Whether there is a Supreme Court order in this favor? Whether legal processes have gone through? Has he gone through that? And he just makes a statement from the podium that this is happening, which means he is deepening the sense of grievance and victimhood of the minorities in India, the Muslim and Christian minorities. And he talks about, anti-conversion laws. Why is he supporting conversion in India? I mean, it's the basic human right of a person that his beliefs should not be interfered with. If on his own, if he wants to change his beliefs, let him change. But it cannot be that there has to be a right to convert his beliefs. And that if this right is breached, then the United States Secretary of State should go on a podium and talk about it. Now, and then, of course, you are aware, I'm aware of the orchestrated campaign in the Western press. And it's all orchestrated because the same arguments given again and again and again and again. No new argument at all. And that argument, and those are the arguments which the opposition in India, rightly or wrongly, has been raising. Now, they are very sensitive about foreign interference in their election processes, but they've gone ahead and used their media and their think tanks and their civil society to interfere in India's election process. We don't have this kind of problem with Russia, which means that this kind of irritation is not there in our ties, which gives us a sense of comfort. So I think the United States should do some rethinking on their side, especially as they're very vulnerable on their own. Look at their domestic situation and the levels of democratic backsliding in their country, where the presidential candidate is being everything is being done to deny him the right to fight the election, and using the judiciary to end his candidature if they can. Plus the manner in which they treat their blacks and everything. They've got so many vulnerabilities, and as far as minorities are concerned, okay, there may be some. India is not a perfect society. There are historical issues. There are obviously mistakes are committed. There are social tensions. But what has the United States done to the Islamic world? They've destroyed the whole many Islamic countries, destroyed their whole societies. They're worried about some destruction of homes and religious places. What's happening in Gaza? Who's supporting or averting, actually supporting Israel's action in that regard, right or wrong? I don't want to pronounce on the merits of the issue. But the point is, America knows that these are the facts on the ground. Therefore, they should be careful in what they say.
Right, sir. Another important factor when we are talking about India's relationship with Russia, especially now, is the China factor. That there are concerns among the diplomatic strategic community in India that Russia's deepening dependence on China, and largely in the aftermath of the Ukraine war and the consequent international isolation of Russia, is not good news for India. It is also about that with this close, what the two countries are, what China is projecting it. We used to use the expression all-weather ties between India and Russia. Now, similar vocabulary is being used by China for its relations with Russia. I mean, how do you look at this? What does it mean for for going forward, India's relations with Russia? Will it cast a shadow?
Yeah. Now, insofar as when the United States was building up a relationship with China, and the spurt in the ties occurred after we signed the nuclear agreement. It's from 2005 onwards that really the relationship blossomed. And this was the time when we were also began strengthening our ties with the United States. But were we worried about U.S.-China relationship? We thought that we had separate interests with the United States. We had our problems with China. And therefore, we were looking at this in a broader perspective, that there is nothing we can do to stem the expansion of U.S.-China ties, whether we liked it or not. That there was no point in banging our head on something which we were not going to achieve. And therefore, we looked at what we thought we should be able to derive from our relationship with the United States, and let the United States do what it wants to do with China, because there's nothing we can do about it. Now, similarly, in the case of Russia and China, what has pushed Russia into the arms of China? It's not as Russia has voluntarily said that, look, we need to strengthen our ties with China, even as we expand our ties with the United States. No, it's the United States that has pushed Russia into the arms of China more and more and more, with the kind of absolutely draconian sanctions that they've imposed. So if they have oil to sell, which is their easiest customer to sell to, oil hungry, China, energy hungry, China. If China needs raw materials, and Russia is full of raw materials, Uh, who do they sell to? Sell to China. If they have problem in managing the ruble and foreign exchange and this and that transactions because of the weaponization of the dollar, what do? They tie up with the yuan. Now 80% of their trade, which is $200 billion with China, is being done through yuan. If they need consumer goods because they've been shut out from the European market, China is the biggest manufacturing power in the world. And not only consumer goods, so many other goods they can supply to Russia. So it's a win-win situation on both sides. And then more than that, if the United States says, Russia, you are our enemy, and China, you are our enemy, then these two enemies will have interest to cooperate with each other. So therefore, this is something we have to live with. That is one aspect of it. There's nothing much we can do. Other thing is that we can attenuate the consequences of this with a few things. One, of course, is that keep your foot into BRICS. Very important, because BRICS now is expanded. So the other players, some of them have very close ties also with the West, although there are developing differences between them and the West, Saudi Arabia or whatever you. So keep a foot in the BRICS. So that actually helps you to contain China's maneuverability, because it's all based on consensus, and therefore China has to be a part of that consensus. Number one. Number two, SCO. Very important. We are an Asian country. We can't be ousted from Asia. And if the whole game, as it appears, is that Asia for the Asians or the West should be kept out of Asia or Eurasia, it's not a strategy that is helpful to us. We have major interests as an Asian power in Asia, whether it is Central Asia or Afghanistan or Iran or what have you, and therefore within the SCO again we would have a possibility of ensuring that some kind of a trilateral balance between Russia, China, and India is maintained. Number three, strengthen your ties with Russia. That at the end of the day, if Russia doesn't want to be dominated by the United States and the West, it doesn't want to be dominated by China either. And they see the difference in power today. 1.4 billion people on that side, 140 million people this side. Huge expanse of territory bordering China, which is virtually without people and with huge resources. They have to protect that. And there is the history of relationship between the Mongols and the Russians. And then, of course, Russia doesn't want a G2 either. After all, when Russia talks about multipolarity, what does it mean? It doesn't mean G2. And what is China's ultimate aim? It is G2. And how can this G2 goal be stymied? One of the ways of doing that, apart from expansion of BRICS and everything else, is India. Right. India is the only country which has the size and the capacity and the future, the potential of countering China. Therefore, Russia has an interest in also being close to India in order to balance China.
Right.
So I think we should look at it in a larger perspective.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador Sibal, for that very useful perspective. My last question to you would be, coming back to the concrete agenda for Prime Minister Modi's visit to Moscow. This is a very layered relationship. It has a very robust architecture. What new areas are we looking at, or we can expect some outcomes, some new avenues to open up? As they say, crisis begets new opportunities. In the middle of all that is happening in the world, what more can India and Russia do together?
Coincidentally, there was one issue which you raised, which I didn't address, which was this logistics agreement between India. But this has been in the offing. So it's not anything new. So I think it will be signed, because after all, we're doing military exercises with Russia. in the
Right.
Indian Ocean, this and that,
Right.
and therefore it'll give access to Russian ships to our ports and servicing those and this and that, and vice versa. So I think this is pretty okay, and also it'll balance the fact that we've signed some logistics agreements with the United States, with
Right.
France, with Japan, with Australia, and we should have one with Russia, which is our biggest defense partner in some senses.
Right.
But as far as new areas are concerned, I think I had outlined earlier that we need to clarify the problems that have arisen from the old areas, which are the core areas in our relationship with Russia. Defense
Right.
ties, how they can be expanded in the terms of advanced technologies, manufacturing in India, helping India develop self-sufficiency, use India as an export base, as we want to do with other countries. Then connectivity in terms of the India North-South, the international North-South corridor, which has become very, very important in terms because of the sanctions imposed on Russia and blocking Russia from access to European ports and everything else. So if this can, and Russia now is pushing hard for this. So this is something which will be discussed and pushed. Then there is the free trade agreement between India and the Eurasian Economic Union. Earlier on, in my time, we were talking about India-Russia FTA, but the Russians at that time had said that we are working on the Eurasian Free Trade Area, and we don't want to enter into engagements which can later tie our hands with regard to the larger Eurasian FTA we are discussing. Now, Putin has been talking about the BRI and the European and the Eurasian Economic Free Trade Agreement, creating some kind of a synergy. And the door is being opened to now having substantial talks about an India-Eurasian Union FTA. So that is another area. Plus, of course, the development of Russia, so Northeast. There is the issue of manpower. Russia now needs manpower, and India can supply that manpower. The Russians are very chary of Chinese manpower because Chinese manpower can have many, many implications.
So are we working on some mobility agreement in this area? Mobility and migration agreement?
I think this got a little complicated because some Indians went there on on the basis of manpower needs, and then they enrolled themselves into the Russian military and were sent to the front, and this creates some kind of a diplomatic issue. Yeah, so we have to do it in a way that these manpower needs are intended for economic purposes, not for military purposes on the ground. But this is a big potential area, especially in the Northeast. And this is one of the goals of India in order to facilitate mobility and this and that, and meet on the skill side in particular. Then in the IT sector, in all the critical technology sector, there is potential of cooperation with Russia. This will also be discussed. So there is a whole range of issues. And trade, I just saw from the press that there's been 18% increase of Indian exports to Russia in the last year, and we for the first time are selling aluminium sheets to Russia, where Russia is one of the biggest producers of aluminium in the world. So there are pharmaceuticals is a very big area, very, very big area where we can cooperate with Russia, and in terms of food supplies and everything else, vegetables and stuff like that. This can be done, especially if the international North-South corridor becomes more operational, because there's always a problem of logistics between us and Russia. So there is a lot of potential.
Right. The sky is the limit, as they say. And on the trade and trade front, especially, there is a good news story that is unfolding. For many years, we struggled to have around $15 billion trade or something, which is hard to do. And now I think we're touching around $40-50 billion, largely on account of oil imports. Right?
70 billion.
Right. So thank you, Ambassador Sibal, for sharing your insights into the current play and the future trajectory of this very important, mutually empowering partnership, and Prime Minister Modi's forthcoming visit to Russia. From what you say and from what we can make out, that the multidimensional India-Russia partnership is headed for acceleration in virtually all sphere, and the relationship itself has become now a showcase of India's strategic autonomy. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Decoding Diplomacy. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.